Once we know what the feelings are and we talk about it on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, we don't know how to find the therapist. We don't know how to get into services. We don't know how to have the conversation with our parents if we're on their insurance and need to use it. So it's progressed now to where it's not just stigma. It's really what I've become even more passionate about. It's connecting the dots with access.
This is where it all begins. So say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, creators, and disruptors who are fueling innovation in emerging markets across the country. Super excited. I'm with my co-host, Leanne Buchanan.
Hello, everybody.
And we have a really great guest today, Melissa Douglas. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Melissa, we really want to understand what fuels and drives your passion as the lead of goal-driven counseling. But before we talk about what you do, we want to learn who you are. And so the question that I love to kick off these conversations with is, what is your superpower, and when and how did you first discover it?
That's such a fun question. My superpower, I would say it's definitely the full jump into helping people. My cape is full of compassion and empathy and resources and skills and just seeing people for people first. So I would definitely say my superpower is the power of being the helper.
And Melissa, when did you fall in love with helping people?
Yes, I don't even remember. It's been that long. I've always had, and I would definitely credit to just my grandmother and just being raised in a way that I always looked to giving back to other people. And so I just remember that just being ingrained in like what we do. And as I got older and just started paying attention to just the world and family dynamics and just all those kind of things, I was like, you know what, like, this is needed more. Yeah. So it just grew more and more, but I don't remember when.
A lot of times that's how it goes, right?
Yeah. Now,
your work focuses on a topic that a lot of people find to be taboo, but I think more recently we've realized that I wouldn't just say mental health, but like emotional agility, having the competency and the skill set to navigate the wholeness of who we are as people, the good, the bad, and the challenges. Yours is really different. You're focused on like goal-driven counseling. So talk to us a little bit about what does that mean? But for me, more importantly, I want to understand, where did that come from? What events or circumstances in your life made you realize that this was your calling?
Oh, we don't got no time for that.
Oh, we got time. We got time.
So really to sum it up, I mentioned my grandmother, right? So I was adopted very young. My father was killed when I was younger. My mom was addicted to substances throughout my childhood. I grew up separately from my birth siblings and again, had a good childhood. Like, you know, even though with all those circumstances, my grandmother who raised me really made for a good life. But there was this assumption that those family dynamics that I was very aware of, knew about, my grandmother made sure that I knew of my birth mother and we had a relationship and all of that. There was an assumption that because I was raised outside of that environment that I was just okay. And I had that assumption as well until I got to college. And just full disclosure, I'm from inner city Chicago, Inglewood, and we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about self-care. We didn't talk, like, those are not things that were topics of conversation. So when I got to college and further realized, like, that's the time where most young adults have the highest levels of stress, the highest levels of anxiety. They have pretty much their first experiences with mental health crises, as we say. I didn't fall outside of that. So it wasn't until my college experience that I was like, oh, girl, you've been holding on to a lot of stuff and didn't know, right? You just didn't know. So my vocabulary of what mental health even meant, what emotional intelligence meant, I heard you say emotional agility. I love that word. Me having my own experience with anxiety and that getting very high and stress getting very high. That was when I knew like, okay, this is really what it's going to be for me. And it's important to figure out what to do with that. You know, what to do with that when you're a person who have not been fully aware of the other side. So I just started paying attention more, started really paying attention to family and where I came from and the people around me, and also how we were very different too. Just kind of all of that in itself kind of pushed me to become more or realize like this was my space. And it wasn't until I became face to face with my own challenge in this area that I was able to do that.
It's so interesting that trauma, and I know Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry have a book out called What Happened to You, that talks about the big T trauma and the little T trauma.
Yes.
And I know Tyler's going to get into this in a moment, but so much of unpacking little T trauma is a journey of awareness and developing the skill sets to be present and understand really what's going on.
Yeah, and even identify it as that. Because I think oftentimes we don't have the language to say that was traumatic and that did affect me in that way, even if it didn't show up in my life in the way that it showed up in somebody else's life. So again, that vocabulary and that awareness is like the first step before we can even categorize it as little or big. Like, let's even recognize that it's trauma
For sure.
within itself. Yeah.
So helping people.
Yeah.
My wife says I'm a fixer, and then when she wants a listener, like I'm just not that person. But you can't just be a fixer. You have to be a listener. So just tell me about like the work.
Yeah, the work is such a privilege. I love the work that I do. When I talk to my clients, I often tell them like, you hired me and I work for you now. You know, it's my job to fully understand your life through your eyes and for me to craft and help craft what those interventions and treatments are going to look like that's going to be individualized and best for you. So I really consider it an honor because when people go to therapy, they are opening up their full life story to a stranger. And I fully understand like how scary that can be. But it can also be the most empowering opportunity to get an objective, non-personal, person in your life that's not going to give you advice or tell you what to do. Or my least favorite term, if I was you, I would. But the work is authentic. The work is unscripted. The work is, again, that word individualized keeps getting pointed out to me. And it's precious because I fully understand that sometimes like lives are placed, in my responsibility. The work is great.
So when do people come to you? I mean, obviously, I bet you would say it's good to just be preventative or just ongoing.
Yes.
But I'm sure it's not always like that.
It's not. I love that you asked that. And I also love that the question also came up just about the term goal driven. I would say like I knew when I was planning for the business, like I knew what I wanted it to be. But coming up with the name was the hardest part ever. It was like, how do I name this thing that I'm thinking about? And for me, like, and I think it pulls both of those together is I really wanted to normalize mental health goals, right? So I feel like in our just Western society and culture, like we are very goal driven, right? It's the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and have those SMART goals and figure out, your career, figure out family, figure out all these things. Why is mental health not on that table either? Because it's the basis that's going to help fuel all those different areas of your life. So I see it as us normalizing just mental health conversations. And so people come to me with all kind of situations. Sometimes it's really, really hard stuff that they're experiencing, and they have realized, like, I'm not doing a good job with this by myself. And I need somebody else that has been trained and skilled and can help walk me through this. Sometimes it's people being completely unaware, but they just know the feeling that they have is just becoming pretty unbearable. And they're like, I don't know what I need, but maybe you can help me figure that out. But then the other side of that is people come to me through good times, you know, through the next promotion, through the next job change, through the next milestone, because I think we often don't recognize that even when great things are happening in our lives, they can also come with stress. It can also come with overwhelm. It can also cause us to second guess ourselves, and that imposter syndrome then comes out. So it's an array of things. I get to support and help with those preventative measures through the good, but then also help people to realize that all that they need is already inside of them, but just like, let's name it. And another factor of that too is just helping people heal and realizing what that can look like.
It's interesting. You mentioned that it's a lot of responsibility, the weight of what you're doing, the weight of the work, quite frankly. How do you describe to people the process of growth, of healing, of elevation of self, of dying to ego? Like, how do you describe some of these things to people so that they can appreciate what you're doing? Because for so many of us, mental health and personal development, we think about it as either DSM, so Diagnostics or Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or a self-help book at Barnes and Nobles. And it's so much more multifaceted than that.
This is going to be one of those therapist terms, but it's a process. And I had to laugh before I said it because I know that's heard so much. It's a process. It's a journey. It's this, it's that. But it's the truth, it's really hard to describe because it's so different for everybody. And so I like to think of it as like, when you think about an onion, and all those layers that you pull back, at one layer, that self-help book might be the thing, and I think it's also important to just call to attention to like the different seasons in our life that call for different things too. One season, a self-help book might be the thing to help me keep going and pushing forward and figure it out. But then that might have an expiration date, and then a next season is going to call for me to really look at my childhood stuff that I didn't quite realize had such depths of things in it. And we have to honor the duality of that too, because sometimes when we think about childhood things and we think about the traumas and hurts that we might have sometimes have compartmentalized or repressed, that also has fueled our resilience too. It also fuels us figuring out, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? I'm going to figure it out the best way I can. Sometimes that's a strength. Sometimes it's not, but then sometimes it progresses, and we do need that understanding that, I have a diagnosable mental health concern. I have this qualifies as a disorder. This is an actual illness, right? So I can't give more than it's a journey and it's a process, because one thing that I think is just so important with this is not just laying an approach on people. That first part is listening and crafting the best thing, process, resource, treatment interventions that is within that particular person's journey or process for themselves.
It's interesting that you said process because it's so individualized.
Yes.
And a lot of times people come at this type of work, and I hate to say like help or therapy, but like the work as something that is one size fits all.
Yes.
How do you destigmatize even the conversations around mental health? And the preconceptions around therapy, particularly, culturally relevant to certain communities where a lot of, I think about, I'm an immigrant from Jamaica, like a lot of the cultural underpinnings are emphasizing secretness. What happens at home stays at home. You don't tell your business in the streets.
Yeah.
So how do you destigmatize and develop a culture around that?
Yeah. You bring it out the house and you talk about it in the streets.
Right.
So like seriously my background is in clinical social work. So before I went into having my own practice and things, like I was a community-based social worker. And so what I really saw as a strength in a lot of these areas is just the education. And in this area, we call this psychoeducation, right? But I really have committed myself to, showing up at the community resource fairs and the conferences and doing the podcast interview, anything that I can think of, blogs, so that the information is out there. Because until we have open conversations about it, that stigma won't change. But I would say it's really exciting in just this time in our country, because that stigma is decreasing. No matter what we talk about, whether it's the movies, the shows, the music, whatever, like mental health is being talked about. It's something that we're showing the humanity in emotions and feelings and experiences and all of that. I will say though, I had a conversation back in 2019. It was through the UMSL. It was a program at UMSL, but it was a ton of high school students there. It was a couple hundred. And we were having this open conversation about mental health. I was doing a presentation and I asked them, like, for your generation, like, what is it going to take for you all to be more comfortable, to move towards therapy and all of that? And they very clearly told me, it's not what the older generations think. Like for us, they're like, we don't see the stigma. It's not that for us anymore. Our favorite rappers are rapping about it and we're seeing it. What they said to me was, we don't know what to do next, though. We don't know, once we know what the feelings are and we talk about it on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, we don't know how to find the therapist. We don't know how to get into services. We don't know how to have the conversation with our parents if we're on their insurance and need to use it. So it's progressed now to where it's not just stigma. It's really what I've become even more passionate about. It's connecting the dots with access too.
Well, you and I met through the We Power Elevate Elevar Accelerator.
Yeah.
And outside of just being an amazing therapist, you're also an amazing businesswoman.
Oh, thank you.
So talk to me about just the challenge of turning your practice into a business where you have other therapists that, you're working with and just all of that.
Yeah, well, let me say your marketing classes were amazing. They opened my mind up so much. We actually improved our mission through Tyler's instruction. But turning into a business, so we're entering 4 years this year. Or we're celebrating 4 years. And boy, oh boy, am I a great social worker and I'm a great therapist. I had no clue 4 years ago about what I was doing with business. And I'm still learning, today. But just not having access or exposure to having personal relationships with entrepreneurs and things, there was so much that I needed to learn, just so much. Like, it makes a whole lot of sense now why people major in like business administration and all those and why all these different facets of business is like their own industry, right? So it was I won't say it was easy turning it into a business. Thankfully, I had colleagues that were also very skilled therapists that believed in what I was doing. And when I got to the point when I kind of got maxed out as a solo provider in practice, they were like, hey, like, we're going to join you and we're going to help you, like, do what it is that you need to do. So my first few contractors were just good friends and good therapists that said, you need help, pretty much. And thankfully, just learning throughout the years how to better structure things, how to pull in all those 18 professionals, like, the conversations that I'm having with accountants and lawyers and HR professionals and marketing professionals is so different. But I realized a couple years ago, like investing in this way is necessary. Like the free Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff, it only gets you so far. And really just understanding how when you want a successful business, you have to invest in a successful business is really like, it was a light bulb moment for me. And I just started approaching it very, very differently. So I'm looking forward to like how that's going to pay off in the years to come.
Tyler asked you to talk a little bit about the challenges in business, and you shared some of the things that you've learned in terms of operations and functions. But what have you learned about yourself as an entrepreneur, as a founder?
I have learned, I've learned that I'm the visionary. I've learned, so in prior roles and jobs, like, you know, I was the direct care, like details, you know, person. And it's no surprise why I always felt stifled in other roles. And so what I've learned about myself is like, I have lots of ideas. Like, I'm really passionate about the next thing that I can figure out that's going to help the community with mental health. I am also learning that it's important to bring in people that have skills that I don't have or the things that don't help me to continue to grow the business in the way that it needs to grow, learning how to delegate, learning how to find people that have the strengths that are not necessarily my strengths, and getting more comfortable with that. So I learned I'm the big vision person and the overseer, and I need people that are going to help me in the little pieces to keep it all going. I think that's what I'm learning and seeing. And I'm also learning just to get more comfortable with my abilities. I think in the first few years, I was just so anxious about, you know, doing it all right and making a mistake and all of that. And now I realize like mistakes are normal. Like they're supposed to be made so that you can learn from them and develop and grow and figure out what doesn't work so that you can do something different. And I think I was so fearful of the mistake at first. But yeah, I'm just learning more about freeing just myself outside of just being a businesswoman. I think a lot of that spoke to some of just the internal challenges that I had as a person, period. So yeah, my healing journey continues as I continue in business too.
Well, with that, it's time for the lightning round.
Yes, I'm excited.
After you, Tyler.
After me, let's see what we have. What was your childhood dream?
My childhood dream was to be a lawyer. I thought I was going to be a defense attorney for juveniles. So I was the Olivia Pope in my head. But yeah, my dream was to be in the courtroom, shutting people down with my closing statement. But life took me elsewhere.
It's not all like the movies or TV. Trust me.
Listen, those law classes, I was like,
Oh, yes. So how do you show love to others?
I'm a doer. I'm a service person. I'm an active service person. I'm also a words of affirmations person. So through what I say and what I do, that's how you know, oh, she got love for me.
Where have you found peace?
Oh, I have found peace in continuing to learn myself more and accept that and just like go with that. So I'm finding peace in continuing to develop and grow. I'm still fairly a young woman, so I'm just finding peace in making my way and being authentic in whatever that looks like.
What would you do if you were not afraid?
Oh, y'all in this lightning round. If I was not afraid. If I was not afraid, I would be a lot further on my goals list. There are some things that I've set aside out of fear and that I haven't moved forward on out of fear. So I would see a lot more done.
Follow up. other than staying stuck, how does fear show up in your life? How does fear manifest for you?
Fear in the natural, basic definition of anxiety. I'm very honest with, people when it's appropriate that even as a therapist, I experience a great deal of anxiety, that I apply all the treatment interventions and all the coping skills that I'm teaching my clients to do too. So fear shows up in me doubting myself, in me going through analysis paralysis, where perfectionism and just trying to have everything correct before I take a move. And I'm learning more and more how to just do it.
Do it scared.
Just do it scared.
That's a good place to end it. But before we do, Melissa, tell people how they can get in touch with you with goal-driven counseling.
Yeah, absolutely. So Goal Driven Counseling, our website is goal, and it's GOAL, like goal setting. So goaldrivencounseling.com. Whenever people are interested in setting an appointment or working with one of our therapists, we have a virtual pre-screen. So one of the biggest things that I always hear people complain about is, I called a particular office and nobody emailed or called me back. And we have put the full intake process in our clients' hands. So you can choose your therapist, you can review their bios, you can request your appointment all on your own from our website. Goal Driven Counseling, the best way is through our website. And I have personal sites, but then also Goal Driven is on Facebook and Instagram as Goal Driven Counseling. But then personally, I go by the virtual clinician. So I am on Instagram specifically as the virtual clinician as well. And LinkedIn too. I love LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn as Melissa Douglas, the virtual clinician.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Melissa. This was such a great conversation.
It was awesome. I enjoyed myself. Thank you all so much for having me.
Fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Innovation City. If you like this episode, you can find more episodes at innovationcity.co or anywhere where you watch or listen to podcasts. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come.